All right. Well, thanks for coming today. Nothing like being the cleanup batter or something like that. All right. Well, I want you to work with me for just a second and imagine that you are back in junior high school. Maybe one of the worst moments in your life I could have you imagine, right?
But then we have to stop paying attention.
Yes, and stop paying attention. But what I want you to imagine, and in particular about junior high, is maybe not so much the really crappy, angsty ways you felt. Well, actually, I do want you to imagine that. I want you to think in particular about something that you were really passionate about in junior high, the sort of PG thing that you were passionate about in junior high. And the thing that would have inspired you to get up in the morning, to go to school, to be excited about just continuing one day after the next. And I want you to think if how you would have felt if day after day there had been adults in your life, maybe your parents, your teachers, the people at your church, people in the mass media who continued to say that this thing that you really enjoyed doing, this thing that you loved, that you were passionate about, that inspired you, that it was bad for you, that it was destroying your life, and that we are going to come up with a way of regulating it, legislating it, and restricting it. Now, what would you have done? How would you have felt? What would your response have been? Probably a little frustrated. Well, what I want to talk to you today is about a real-life instance of this happening. Back in the 1940s and 50s, comics were the thing, bigger than video games are today with young people, bigger than text messages, social networking, anything that you can imagine. Comics were bigger than that. And in the late 1940s and into the 1950s, a lot of people in the United States had a lot of very unkind things to say about comics. To the point that by the early 1950s, the US Senate had gotten involved and was thinking about what it could do to regulate comics, particularly young people's access to comics. Now, I've been doing historical and archival work on comics for a number of years now, and most of that work has focused on the relationship between librarians and comics. Some of it was okay, not all of it. But in the course of doing some research at the Library of Congress and the National Archives a couple of years ago, I began to find letters from kids. The kids who, the senators, who psychiatrist Frederick Wertham, the kids who were reading comics. And they were writing to these adults to try to convince them not to take their comics away from them. A lot of these letters are from kids who were junior high school age, 11, 12, 13, 14. And they had some interesting things to say. Some of them were fairly simplistic, kind of funny. Anybody that goes out and kills someone because he read a comic book is a simple-minded idiot. Sounds silly, so does your item. This was a letter that an 11-year-old wrote to Frederick Wertham, a psychiatrist who was at the head of the AntiComics Movement throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s. A lot of kids tried to point out, maybe somewhat simplistically, the logical flaws that existed in many of the adults' arguments. Now, some kids, like Brian Mulholland, who was a little bit older, were really out to demonstrate that they were not corrupt juvenile delinquents just because they read comics. This might seem kind of weird today, but it really was a hot issue then. As I was reading through many of these letters, I began to think about who these kids were, who they were in real life, because it's easy when you're looking at historical documents to forget that they were constructed, created by real people. And so I decided, well, maybe I can find some of these people. Maybe I can find out what they were thinking, what motivated them to write these letters. So Brian Mulholland was one of the first folks I found. He is a retired district attorney, still living in New Jersey. And when I sent him this letter and I talked to him on the phone, he said, you know, I couldn't have written a better letter today. Now, this is from a man who's nearly, 70 plus years old, an attorney, and he was incredibly proud of that letter that he wrote to the Senate in 1954. as we were wrapping up the conversation and I turned off the recorder, he began to tell me about a comic story that he remembered reading as a teenager. He was about 13. And he said, you know, I was just telling my son about this story, and I haven't seen it. You know, I haven't read it since I was in junior high. And he describes it. And he describes it in this incredibly rich detail, panel by panel. He tells me the dialogue. He tells me how the characters looked in the story. He tells me, you know, 10 minutes worth of what this story is about. And I knew as he was talking exactly what story he was telling me about. It was this story, Judgment Day, in an EC Comics magazine from the early 1950s. But this story was so powerful that it stuck with him for more than 60 years. And I think that's a testament to some of what we can begin to learn from young readers in comics. Now, I haven't been able to talk to all of the kids who've written letters that I found, but still, you know, there are some kids who went beyond, I guess, demonstrating that they were good kids and sort of poked a little bit of fun at the adults, checking to see, you know, what alternatives were these adults proposing. I really like this letter. This is from a young woman, Lynn Crawford, who grew up in Atlanta. And she goes on a very long, sort of 2.5-page rant about should we give up our comics and instead smoke and drink instead. I really do wonder what Wortham thought about this. I'm pretty sure that he was not a teetotaler. I do know that he smoked. And I don't think he minded adult crime and sex books, quite honestly. He just didn't want kids to have their comic books. There are letters like this one from Philip Proctor, who was 14, an 8th grader when he wrote this, who, through his letter, tried to explain to the Senate what it was that he and other comics readers got out of reading comics, what drew them into purchasing comics. And it was really the letters like this that encouraged me to begin to work more avidly, trying to bring back, reclaim, so to speak, the voices of these young comic readers, to begin to find more of them, to talk to them. Because we know a lot about the creators of comics, we know a lot about early comics publishing history, we know a lot about the stories in comics, but what we don't know is a lot about the 30+ million young people who spent almost all of their waking non-school hours for about 20 years in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s reading comics, comic books, and comic strips. I've had a chance to talk with Phil Proctor. Some of you who are a little bit older or who are into comedy might know him as the co-founder of the Firesign Theater, which is either Monty Python on acid or America's Monty Python if you want the slightly cleaner version. And he still feels very strongly about his comics reading experiences, that they were very formative for him, that they encouraged him to grow up to become a satirist. And in fact, this particular letter, he said, you know, really was a first attempt by him to, quote, put it to the blue-nosed, tight-lipped censors of comics and other people who would take away our access to materials and information. So there's a lot left in this project to come. I've just begun talking to folks, but I hope you'll stick around and read what there is over the next couple of years. So thank you.